So I was in chiropractic school, and a friend of mine was a bigwig at the local amphitheater in Dallas, Texas, where I was going to chiropractic school. And I had been treating him, and he needed a chiropractor for the Guns N' Roses show. So he called me and said, can I come out and work on those guys? And that was my favorite band in the world at the time. It was an unbelievable opportunity. So of course I jumped at that opportunity, ran out there, treated 4 guys the first night, told the tour manager to call me if he didn't want me to come back for the second night, so I made it a little harder for me not to come back for the second night. I came back the second night and ended up treating about 70 people before the show started, including all the band except Axl. So the band told the lead singer, Axl Rose, about me, and he sent his personal assistant over to see if I could stick around after the show and work on him, and like I had anything better to do. So of course I waited till after the show and worked on Axl, and he liked the type of work that I did, and they called a few days later and asked me to come out on tour with them.
So at that point you didn't have this shop.
Correct.
You were pretty young. This is what, 20?
Yeah, this was in July of 1991. So the truth is, now I'm a licensed chiropractor, but at that time I had done all my requirements except what I term fulfilling my prison term, because we had to be in the clinic for 3,000 hours. But I had passed all my national boards. I'd passed both the West Virginia and the Texas State Board exams. I had completed all my clinical requirements except sitting in the clinic for 3,000 hours. And so I was in a great position to be able to take off on tour. I had no real obligations. And so off I went, and Axl hardly let me out of his sight for the next 2+ years.
So what did you walk into? I mean, what kind of atmosphere did?
Well, it was pretty simple. Any chiropractor could have done what I did at that point, because it was the weekend after the St. Louis riots. If you've ever heard of that, pretty famous, that Axl jumped off stage to take a camera away from a fan, and it turned into a riot. And then the St. Louis district attorney was trying to run for all the publicity he could get with that, so he chased Axl Rose all over the country trying to arrest him. So it was pretty funny. We'd send decoys one way, and we'd go a different way, and we'd jump on a Learjet and send the band in a different plane just to avoid this guy. It was funny.
Was there a big party atmosphere, I guess, that you ever were exposed to, or were you just kind of?
Oh no, it was church every Friday night for the Guns N' Roses guys. Yeah, it was 2.5 year-long party with the Guns guys.
How has that all developed since then? Obviously it didn't end in '93. There's stuff all over the place in here. So how have you stuck with all these guys?
Well, a security guy for the band Skid Row, which was opening for a bunch of the Guns shows, told Jon Bon Jovi that Axl had his own personal chiropractor, and he should get one. And so they called, and we happened to have a break. The hired rhythm guitarist this time was a guy named Gilby Clark, and Gilby had flown home to LA from Mexico. We had a couple days break in Mexico, and he'd been in a celebrity motocross race and broke his arm. So it was going to take at least 4 weeks for him to be able to play again. So that the timing on that for me worked out perfect, because the manager for Bon Jovi called the manager for Guns, and so Axl said I could go out and work with those guys for the next 3.5 weeks. So I flew to Europe and met up with the Bon Jovi guys, and that was in May. And then we went after that 3.5 weeks, then we started what we called the Guns and Moses tour, because we started in Tel Aviv, Israel. And so I flew from Dublin, Ireland down to Tel Aviv and hooked back up with Guns N' Roses, and finished another 11 weeks with them, cultivating in a 2 shows in July in Argentina, which is in the winter, middle of their winter down there. But a promoter sold out two 80,000 seat shows in the middle of winter in an outdoor stadium. So we finished up in mid-July in Argentina and then came back to the U.S. and I went back out with Bon Jovi and I've been working with them ever since.
I know there's probably a limit as to what all you can talk about with your experiences with them, but do you have a highlight or a low light that you would want to recount?
Oh man, tough question. There's a gazillion highlights. The low lights, well, when we were in Argentina, a jealous promoter that didn't get the shows had told the Argentinian police that we were importing drugs. And so they decided, the Argentinian FBI decided they were going to search everybody's rooms. And I happened to be in Axl's room, and maybe the first time ever, because we occupied the entire floor, I didn't look through the peephole in the door. When somebody knocked on it, I just opened the door thinking it's one of his two personal assistants, his massage therapist, or his security, or management. And a 9mm came around the door and I'm staring down a 9mm that's 6 inches from my face. That was a low light. And Axl started screaming, just let them in, just let them in. So I unblocked the door and let them in. But yeah, that was kind of scary.
Wow. Well, you're still in contact. I don't know about with Axl at this point, but I know you're still in contact with Jon Bon Jovi.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me a bit about, the fact that you were just there yesterday.
Yeah. He's a great guy. He's treated me very, very well. I've been blessed beyond my wildest imagination. You've been around someone nearly 30 years. It's hard not to develop a pretty close friendship, so we're pretty tight. And he's amazingly successful and works very hard and is a good guy.
Life as a chiropractor would have been a little different, I guess, had you never made these contacts.
Yeah, it really wasn't necessarily in the plans, but you got to be careful for what you wish for, because in the far reaches, in the dark corners and recesses of my brain, I always wanted to go on tour. My mother took me to see a movie called A Star is Born, which was recently remade for the third time with Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper, but I saw the 1976 version with Chris Christopherson and Barbra Streisand, and I was totally enamored with the idea of rock and roll and touring, but I couldn't sing, couldn't dance, I wasn't good looking, and I knew nothing about sound or lighting. So the chances of that happening were slim to none, but miracles do happen, and off I went.
Big concert coming up tomorrow, first one we've had in a long time, and a lot of times when you get big names coming through Charleston, they call you. So
Yeah.
Talk to me a bit about that, I guess.
I've been blessed that I have a good name in the music business and the phone does ring on occasion, and it's really exciting. Jackson Browne, what an incredible career, what an incredible artist. And James Taylor, are you kidding me? James Taylor, oh my gosh, that guy, what a phenomenal guy that is. And I just saw a video a month or two ago of him playing with Carole King back in like 1971. So the rock nostalgia that's coming to Charleston tomorrow night, how blessed we are. I was a world-class pole vaulter through a big part of the 1980s, and I have been blessed beyond my wildest imagination with a scholarship to Abilene Christian University back in 1982, where truly the best pole vaulters on the planet were training. And I was fortunate enough to get to go down and train with the best. And sometimes I think just by the process of osmosis, it leaked over into me. And fortunately, I was the 1986 national champion, and I made the U.S. Olympic trials in 1984 and again in 1988.
You were telling me a little factoid when we were in the other room in there about numbers of people in different countries who could jump 18 feet. Tell me that.
Oh yeah, so it was really interesting. When I got to Abilene Christian, we knew that it truly was the best place on the planet to be a pole vaulter, because Paris, France had two 18-foot pole vaulters at the time, and Russia had two 18-foot pole vaulters living in the same city at the time. But at Abilene Christian, we had four. We had the world indoor record holder in the pole vault. We had the American outdoor record holder in the pole vault. Those are two different people. We had a guy named Tim Bright who went on to make the U.S. Olympic team in '84 and '88 as a decathlete, and then made it in 1992 as a pole vaulter. So he was a 3-time Olympian. He had jumped 18.1 at that time, went on to jump, I think, 19.3 and a quarter. Then we also had a guy named Dale Jenkins, who was the first 18-year-old in the history of the world to jump 18 feet. And all 4 of those guys were my training partners and friends. And like so many of your college buddies, we're all still really tight to this day.
Talk to me a little bit about the, and keep it sort of brief, I guess, but the Abilene Christian Effect.
So this is one of my laughs, is in 1987, prior to that, if you were a Division II or Division III athlete and you met the Division I qualifying standard for the D1 Nationals, and you finished first or second at your nationals, then you could go to the D1 National Championships. So in 1987, I finished 5th, which made me an All-American. Another teammate won the discus throw, obviously made him an All-American. Another teammate won the 800 meters and finished second in the 1500 meters, making him a 2-time All-American there. Oddly enough, after that, no Division II schools could ever compete at the D1 Nationals again. I call that the Abilene Christian rule.
So basically you embarrassed them to the point that they just outlawed it.
That was it. We just embarrassed all these D1 schools so bad they outlawed us.
Wow. From a Christian school in Texas.
From a Christian school in Texas, yeah.
Let's talk about motocross. How in the world did you get started in that, and where in the world have you been with it?
Well, people don't realize, but the biggest motocross and motorcycle promotion company in the world is right up in Morgantown, Racer X. All the motocross you see on TV is promoted from them. All of the, if you're familiar with cross-country racing, the Grand National Cross Country Championships, that's all from them. So West Virginia and Southern Ohio, particularly Southern Ohio, Ohio in general, but Southern Ohio also, is the hotbed for motorcycle racing, off-road or dirt bike racing in the country. People think of California all the time. California has got a lot of good stuff going on out there, and obviously they got great weather for it. But the hotbed for it is West Virginia and Ohio. And so moving back here after touring off and on for nearly 30 years, well, I guess it has been about 30 years actually. Yeah, because we're past July. Anyway, how could I not get into racing dirt bikes?
Well, one of the craziest things to me is you haven't gotten out of it. Right. The most recent one I saw back there was 2019. Probably didn't have the championships in 2020, I'm assuming. So. Well,
you think I'm old, but I'm not. I have that old man's disease, and it's called age, you know. Anyway, so yeah, I'm 57 years old, and I'm still racing dirt bikes.
That's awesome. What maybe is the biggest highlight you can think of from your dirt biking travels and dirt biking career?
Obviously, there's been several, but it's been nice to be a 7-time national GNCC champion and 1-time national enduro champion. But it was also a lot of fun in 2017 and 2018. I traveled to Europe and raced in what's called the Erzberg Rodeo, which is supposed to be the hardest dirt bike race in the world. And it was in Austria in an iron mine. And so that was a lot of fun to go over there and compete in that race. When I look back, my life's been blessed beyond my wildest imaginations. I was a pretty good football player in high school, and I was a state champion in the pole vault. And Don Nealon had promised me a football scholarship that if I just had a good senior year, well, I made first team AAA All-State football. My big claim to fame in Sissonville. I was the last AAA All-State football player from Sissonville because they went AA the next year. But anyway, so how could you have had a much better year than that? But he rescinded his promise, and they asked me to walk on up in Morgantown, and I just wasn't going to do that. And Abilene Christian that year in 1982 was a NAIA school becoming a Division II school. So they were competing at both national championships. So Abilene Christian came to Charleston for the NAIA national championships at Lately Field, and Sissonville High School's track team was helping out. We were being Gophers for all practical purposes. So I got to meet Billy Olson, the world record holder indoors in the pole vault, and Brad Pursley, who became the American outdoor record holder, and all my future teammates. And I'll go ahead and tell the story, because you're going to edit whatever you want to edit.
We'll check back here.
Okay.
All right.
So, so they came to Charleston, and they were, so I got introduced to them being state champion pole vaulter. So the Mike Reed, who was the head of Lately Field at the time, introduced me to Billy Olson, and they kind of sized me up and thought I might be a good decathlete, because I did an odd combination of events. I pole vaulted, I ran the 100 meters, I threw the shot put, and I threw the discus, which is an odd combination. And so they introduced me to Coach Hood, and he liked some of the numbers that he saw with my other events, and I wasn't stupid. College boys are easy. You got to provide two things: beer and chicks. So I convinced my father to let me borrow the van that he used to take my brother to motocross races in, and I knew a bunch of girls from high school, so I talked all those girls into going out with us. So I took them all to dinner, and I've been able to get in any bar in Charleston from the time I was 14 years old on, so getting in a bar was never a problem. So I took them all bar hopping, which was completely against Abilene Christian rules, and got them all hot dates. And Coach Hood brought me in his office a few months later and said, "I don't know what you did to my pole vaulters up in West Virginia, but I have never had a group of athletes come to my office every day for 2 weeks and demand that I give another athlete a scholarship. So that's why you're here."
That's awesome. So literally, one little thing, butterfly effect, I think is what they call it.
Butterfly
effect. One little thing could have changed.
One little
None
thing.
of this
None of
would
it.
have ever come to fruition.
Right, when you look back at that. So to talk of the butterfly effect. So that happened. So I end up at Abilene Christian University, not for any religious reasons, just because it was the best place on the planet to be a pole vaulter, and I had the opportunity of a lifetime. So I go down there, and by osmosis, I became a world-class pole vaulter with those guys. So towards the end of that, or after I graduated in '87, and I'd hurt my back in the weight room my senior year and got carried to the hospital and still couldn't walk the next day, got carried into a chiropractor's office and walked out. From that point forward, I knew what I wanted to do with my life. Being a wildlife biologist was cool, but being a chiropractor was way cooler. So I started trying to figure out what I needed to do to become a chiropractor. And of course, that was all my pre-med stuff that I was already doing, because I was thinking about going to veterinarian school anyway. So I applied to chiropractic school, needed organic chemistry to finish up, so I took a graduate assistant job at Marshall University, and needed a year off for all practical purposes anyway to try to make the '88 Olympic team. So I trained at Marshall and was a graduate assistant at Marshall that year in fall of '87, spring of '88. Met a great chiropractor in Lewisburg, West Virginia, God rest his soul, Dr. Mike Brumfield. He's now passed. And Dr. Brumfield started working with me, and he made me an incredible athlete. He got my 40-yard dash time down to 4.47, which is pretty amazing. And I had as good a chance of making the Olympic team in '88 as anybody else, but I busted up my knee in the qualifying rounds and didn't make the team. And so butterfly effect, I started chiropractic school then 6 weeks later. And had I not started chiropractic school then, I'd have made the Olympic team. Then I'd been another year delayed getting to chiropractic school, and never would have met Billy Morgan, who was the big wig at local amphitheater. Never would have got the job with Guns N' Roses. Never would have got the job with Bon Jovi, and my life would be vastly different.
So in hindsight, were you lucky to have missed the team, or are you curious, or, what would have How do you view that one little pivot point?
I always tried to live my life with no regrets, but inevitably you got regrets. That's a tough one because my whole life is vastly different. I don't regret that in any way. I do wonder what would have happened had I either made the team or I had continued to train for another 4 or 8 years, especially this time of year when the Olympics are on TV and you're watching all these kids live out their dreams and you can't help but wonder what would have happened. But I have no complaints whatsoever. My life has been blessed beyond my wildest imagination. I, most of the time, feel like I've lived 3 or 4 lifetimes already. So the thing that I can say is that way back in the recesses of my brain when I was in the 7th grade and my mother took me to see A Star Is Born, that never left me. And although I couldn't figure out how I was going to get on tour, I always wanted to. And the truth is, I was not capable of dreaming as big as my life turned out to be. So my first bit of advice is, number 1, dream big. Dream audaciously big. Bigger than big. Just dream huge. Number 2, remember, you're the master of your own destiny, the co-creator of your own future, you and God. And if you read into that as you should, being the master of your own destiny is an incredibly powerful statement. And when you realize that you have all the power to create whatever destiny you want to have, then the world is your oyster. You can do anything you want.
So even you dreamed big of being an Olympic pole vaulter, things went askew,
A little
but
different.
life still ended up awesome because you continued to dream big, right?
Yes, absolutely.
You didn't let the first dream going down take down any of the rest of it.
No. And unfortunately that happens to a lot of folks. I will give my father all the credit for that because he said, you have a plan A and a plan B. And my athletic endeavors was my plan A, and that didn't work out. So fortunately for me, my scholastic plan B worked out, but it's blessed me up beyond my wildest imagination. This was in the Oslo, Norway paper. It was a picture of Slash and myself walking down the street in Copenhagen, Denmark. That was kind of neat. And then, of course, the spaghetti incident, platinum record, and then the Illusion platinum records from back in the day when I first started in the music business. This was kind of cool. My dad and Duff playing golf in Australia when we were on tour down in Australia, and flew my dad down to hang out with us, and Axel and I taking a hot air balloon ride in Salt Lake City, and that was kind of neat. And then the 100 million Bon Jovi fans plaque on the wall, and From These Days tour, and that was in '95 and '96. Then the Keep the Faith tour back from '93, and Have a Nice Day. I can't remember, that was around 2003, 2005, something like that. Bon Jovi Plains, and all of us back in Costa Rica, and that was in '93 as well. We shut down the Salt Lake City Olympics in 2002, and that was kind of neat, that Bon Jovi show. Faith Hill and Tim McGraw backstage at the Bon Jovi show. When the planes hit New York City, 9/11, 2001, they had a concert for New York City. That was a pretty neat concert to be at and work. For some older folks, Anthony Quinn, who was a really famous Hollywood movie star, and right before he passed, I flew up to Canada to work on him. He was having some trouble speaking his lines. In 1984, I got invited to be on the U.S. national team with Carl Lewis and Edwin Moses and all our best talent we had in the U.S., and we were in the 8 Nations games in Tokyo, Japan. And for some reason, the world's greatest athlete at the time was a guy by the name of Daley Thompson, and for some reason, he took a liking to me. So we hung out for a whole week, in Tokyo, and he taught me a whole lot about track and field at that level. And I had him sign a poster to my parents, and that hangs on the wall now. All-American certificate, that's it. And then some of the national championship plaques from when I was at Abilene Christian, and then some of the motorcycle plaques for national championships there.